Hi there, I'm Kate West, and I'm the founder of the When Lightning Strikes Community and Film Project. The video you're about to watch is taken from one of our community calls with Dr. Lawrence Edwards. And in order to preserve the privacy of our members, their faces have either been blocked out or their voices have been typed in text. Sorry if it's a little creepy. If you want to find out a little bit more about what we do to support people going through Kundalini process, please click the link underneath the video. And without further ado, I present to you a wonderful talk with Dr. Lawrence Edwards, one of our favorite people to talk to at When Lightning Strikes. So you guys know me, I'm Kate West, and you also know Dr. Lawrence Edwards, who has been someone who's been extremely, one of the most grounding voices for me in all of my voracious search along the quest to find answers with regard to Kundalini.
I second that. Yeah.
Yes.
I will third that.
Yes, definitely.
And
Thank
so
you.
we're all
very
really
grateful for you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. And so I'm excited to have everyone get a chance to ask you some questions, but I'm also excited for you to meet everyone here because we've become kind of like family.
Yeah.
And so you obviously know Lawrence is the author of Kundalini Awakening, published by Sounds True, and a psychotherapist and longtime, practitioner who's worked with thousands of people in Kundalini process. And I wondered if you could just
For 50 years.
Yeah, for 50 years. And I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about your experience in the ashrams, Lawrence, just to give people, some of the people who might not know, the depth to which you've worked with this phenomenon.
Right.
A little bit of an idea about that.
Sure. I think you're referring, because I've been in a number of ashrams and I've run an ashram, so
The ashrams.
the ashram I think you're referring to is in Ganeshpuri, India. And that was the home of Swami Muktananda, who was a renowned, Kundalini master, a real Siddha guru, and renowned for awakening. I mean, his mission was to give that gift to as many people as possible. So I trained under him for years. I trained as a monk, as a sannyasin in India, and the ashram there, lots of times when people think of an ashram, they think, oh, this nice little sort of monastic setting. That's fairly traditional. And that would be like a small corner of the ashram. But this is an ashram that was huge. And, and it would have anywhere from sort of a minimum number of people there as a community, probably about 2,000. On big holidays and events, there would be 12, 14,000 people there. So this was a city in itself, though all run within the context of a real traditional ashram, with all the disciplines, with the practices that start, pre-dawn and run until 9, 10 o'clock at night, and many people were coming from all over the world. Muktananda was, it started out just that he was, the lineage holder from his great master Bhagavan Nityananda, who was just down the road in Ganeshpuri itself early on. He passed away in the 60s. And Muktananda's ashram began with, it was just the 3 rooms that were his little rooms. And that's where he lived the whole time. Even when the whole city grew up around him, Baba lived in these 3 rooms. And people came because they wanted the gift of this awakening. Because, certainly in all the yogic tradition, awakening Kundalini is the pinnacle of sadhana. It's the pinnacle of the evolution of consciousness across lifetimes. It takes lifetimes to ripen to the point where Kundalini will awaken, and one will meet one to facilitate that, or even have a spontaneous awakening. So it's highly regarded, highly revered, and people came to Muktananda both to receive that or to receive guidance. They had awakenings themselves. And my karma, my development over a lifetime, some conscious, some not so accessible, made it clear that there was a close affinity for myself. And so Baba used to have me work with people who were having severe kinds of symptoms of the awakening, this kind of dysregulation that can happen on multiple levels as the Shakti cleans house.
Yeah.
Ma Kundalini Shakti is the consciousness of the infinite. There's no higher consciousness. There's nothing beyond that. So what she can do is boundless. However, for the ordinary mind, she can seem rather ruthless because her main intent is to get you free as quickly as possible. And a lot of people go, no, would you please slow it down? This is what I know that's your agenda, but what about me? And she go, what me? There's no me. There's only me. There's only Shakti. So there's all these shifts in consciousness as well that occur as a part of that unfolding process, and helping people often to have a real understanding of that, the profound context that traditional Kundalini yoga, not sort of the name brand thing that we see these days, but the traditional ancient path of Kundalini yoga, the understanding that is held helps to hold the experiences as well, hold them in an integrative context, so that even when the mind is losing its sense of integration, it has something to refer to, something to understand, as well as that it was always done within the context of a relationship with a teacher.
Right.
Because the teacher's role is in part to hold that space and be able to support, guide a person, walk with a person. I mean, some karmas we have to walk through. Not all karmas just disappear. If we had an inkling of the amount of karmas that are burned off by Kundalini without us even knowing it, we would be humbled onto the floor. So in the yoga context, the understanding of karma is, yes, this karmas we come into this life with, karmas that affect body, mind, relationships, wealth, health, everything. But the accumulation of karmas is this, the Himalayas behind us, of what awaits us to be worked through. That is what is getting also burned off by Shakti. And that's why it's so revered and so held with such awe. There's an ancient teaching story where these two seekers, long-term seekers, they finally find this master, and they go to him and they pranam, and one of the burning questions was, how many lifetimes do we have left? Not unusual. How long will I have to endure this, right? Everybody's familiar with that question. We may not think of it in the context of lifetimes, but if you're from the Eastern traditions, you do. Patanjali's Yoga Sutra starts out with saying that a yogi is one who's prepared to practice for lifetimes. Not a long weekend retreat or a month-long retreat, lifetimes. So it's often a little shocking for the ordinary mind. So these seekers go to this master and ask, and the master, looks at the one fellow who was really voicing that question. The other fellow was too afraid to actually say it. And the master goes, you have as many lifetimes as there are leaves on that tree. And the disciple falls on the ground in gratitude.
Wow.
Gratitude. And says, thank you. And he said, and the master goes on, he says, and by the grace of practices, you'll move through those lifetimes quickly. And they're walking away, and the other fellow turns to him and says, what's with you? He told you you got as many lifetimes as there are leaves on that tree. He said, yeah, but before the grace began unfolding, I had as many lifetimes as there are leaves on all the trees in all the forests. So that shift in perspective of what are we encountering? What's it going to take to move through? Once we've begun, we just continue, because now there really is an end in sight. Without the awakening, that's why it's seen as the culmination of sadhana, and really invokes a whole new level, a quantum leap to spiritual practice. Because up until awakening, practice is pretty much self-willed. It's your volition.
Yeah. So true.
And so if I don't feel like practice, I don't practice. Well, if you're not practicing going this way, you're practicing going that way. Right? That's all there is. So now there's an internal force pushing it. I don't care whether you feel like it or not. That's not what's important. The mind is conditioned to think, oh, but my feelings are the most important thing to me. My thoughts, my feelings, my sensations, my memories, my experience. That's part of the radical shift in understanding and the radical shift in consciousness. That yes, those experiences dominate the ordinary mind, but that's like saying, what dominates a thimble full of water, rather than what's the ocean? You're the ocean. You don't have to identify with the thimble anymore. And that's the shift that Shakti opens up.
Yeah, you had said to me one time, I think I was talking to you in an interview, and I was really frustrated because I couldn't do my yoga practice anymore. And you were like, oh, you're doing yoga. Yoga's doing you. Like,
right.
Your practice, and to this day, I don't practice yoga. I practiced yoga, years ago and a lot. But I think one of the things that you're speaking of is like, we can feel so out of control at stages
of
this process, and that can cause, additional nervous system symptomology and almost exacerbate the activity of whatever Shakti is stirring up. And rightly so, because to validate people who are here, including us, like, who really wants to suffer? And I know, some of the people in our community have had deep suffering. So that context that you're speaking of, I found very helpful, but I couldn't always get that. I couldn't always arrive at that perspective. I've sort of arrived there now, but in the moment, I kind of had to hang on to words. People like you.
Well, and it's why, it's not, oh, let me just watch Kundalini unfold. There are practices that support it being better contained, that help, because the mind has a certain amount of energy that it can use. How is it using it? Because the conditioned mind, and most of the reactivity of the mind, is from old conditioning. And so the conditioned mind has all these patterns. And those patterns of conditioning, those patterns of reactivity, it's familiar with, doesn't mean it was in control. How many people can really say they control their mind? Marginal control. That's an illusion. And it's an illusion that sadhana in general, practices in general, and meditative practices in yoga, confronts us with just how out of control the mind is, how much its notion of control is a fantasy. So it's saying, no, now we're going to have, that's going to shift. And the power that's going to be in control is this power of grace, the power of the infinite, to clear up this instrument. But the instrument still has, the mind body still have the ways that they can act and make choices to support that deconditioning. Because so much reactivity is conditioned from past events. When you look at it from lifetimes, there are conditioned patterns from lifetimes of past events. That's why the psychology of yoga is very different than traditional Western psychology that looked for sort of the antecedent conditions in this lifetime to explain trauma or patterns. Whereas the Eastern traditions go, well, if you're looking for antecedent causes, you can go back lifetime after lifetime after lifetime after lifetime.
Yeah.
How long do you going to do that? Because while you're looking, you're actually digging that hole deeper, because you're still identified with that instrument and still caught and still bound by those patterns.
Mm.
So how do we transform the patterns? How do we get free of those?
Mhm.
And understand too, you know, in the yoga context, the tradition, both in, you know, Hindu yoga context as well as Buddhist yoga context,
Mhm.
this power, this energy of consciousness that's accessed was really thought of as happening with individuals who are long practiced,
Mhm.
that had really cleared a lot of the conditioned mind through probably lifetimes of meditative mindfulness kinds of practices of detachment, deconditioning, non-reactivity, so that when this got going, it was going to bounce off fewer things. But here we have many people awakening. I mean, that's also predicted from the yogic tradition, because in the yogic tradition, Buddhist and yoga too, a yogi brashta, somebody who's done yoga in past lifetimes, the good karma of that continues, which means that's part of the ripening process. That's part of, when we say, spontaneous awakening, well, that's really because you weren't conscious of all the work you did in past lifetimes, cultivating the field for that awakening. Didn't come out of nowhere. It came out of lifetimes of your efforts already for setting yourselves up for this magnificent event, as challenging as it might be. And that often people are taking on karmas in their last lifetimes, extra karmas in a sense. They're trying to get rid of things, you know? And so we see that people who have a history of trauma, that's their nervous system is going to be more reactive.
Yeah.
So it's likely that the extra energy of awakening is going to say, okay, we got to work on that reactivity. Otherwise, it's just going to seem like it gets worse.
Yeah.
Two sort of emotional sets of samskaras, old patterns, this life, past lives. The ones that have to do with anger and fear are the most disruptive for the flow of Shakti. Anger and fear.
Aren't those the ones that get kicked up the most?
Well, depends on your karma.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's important to see that's not who you are.
Yeah.
This is an old pattern that the mind got stuck in. When we say the mind, that means we get stuck being identified with this. Now, the root cause of suffering is wrong identification. That's in the fundamental part of the yogic Hindu tradition, the Buddhist tradition, mystical traditions across the board. If we're identified with aspects of mind and body, our consciousness comes to inhabit just that. It's like what we identify with is like what I was saying before, the little thimble. And, you know, if as soon as you say I am, and anything that comes after that is the thimble. Now, a thimble, well, that's a container. It doesn't hold much, but you pour I am consciousness in that, you become that. Consciousness is like water. It takes the shape of the container it's given. So anything you identify with, I am angry, you became anger. That's very different to say, I see anger arising in this. Oh, now I'm detached and I'm watching. To be detached and watch puts you much closer to the consciousness that is your true nature. So we're training ourselves, get out of those containers. Some of them seemed like a safe refuge at some time, so we really cling to them. Some of them horrible, but we got beaten into them so often that they became home. But none of them are the truth of who you are.
Yeah. You want to see?
Yeah.
Oh, I thought you
I
did.
did.
Oh, do it
earlier.
Oh, yeah, I know. I feel like I want to open, if it's okay with you. I want it because I've spoken with you a lot, and I want to just, I could think of what I think my friends here want to ask, or I could just let them ask. So can we just open this up to questions, and we can,
And may I lead?
You may,
because
Gordon.
I just remembered what I was going to say.
Okay.
So,
Figure out how to unpin myself, and then, okay, go ahead.
And so it's interesting, we've been beating ourselves up because we haven't felt like doing yoga or whatever. And
you have been beating yourself up. I do not beat myself up.
I have
doing yoga.
I used to meditate a ton. All I did was yoga. But then defining practice, then we have come to realize that we're actually practicing all day long in the other limbs of the yogic philosophy. And that we all know that yoga, pranayama, mantra, whatever, is just a facet. And so I don't know if it's a fair question, but how would you define practice?
I think it's a fair question.
Yeah. So yeah, no, you have to know what practice is. And so when you're doing practices, but then we have to have greater understanding. I mean, so there's so much to yoga. I mean, that's just not touched on in the West. The understanding is often so superficial that it is nearly dangerous, frankly, because it leads people astray. So practice, for instance, yes, hatha yoga is a practice, asanas, pranayama, those kinds of things. As soon as you move into the realm of what happens with Kundalini yoga, the classic Kundalini yoga, the definition of the classic Kundalini yoga was the yoga that spontaneously unfolds after awakening, right? So rather than kriya, it's all kriyas, as well as then practices that the teacher would give that are empowered practices to help work with those kriyas, help work with the transformation of mind and consciousness that are the aim of Kundalini. And so practices then are divided largely into three categories. There are practices, because the practice that you do also depends on the state that you're in, the state of consciousness. So for instance, in the Shiva Sutras, there's ancient texts from Kashmir Shaivism. There's one of the fundamental works on Kundalini even. And Jaideva Singh's translation and commentary on that is superb. So a reference, though not easily read. But one of the things that's pointed out in these traditions is this notion of what state are you in, because that's going to determine the practice. So if we're in a state of feeling separate, there's the divine and there's me. It's completely dualistic. You're in a dualistic state, right? Well, then you have to do a practice that takes you from that state and moves you towards unity. Understanding that all of yoga is movement towards unity consciousness. That's what it's aimed at, is knowing the infinite as your own self, merged in that, living from that, informed by that moment by moment. That is Kundalini Shakti. That is the consciousness of that state. And to the extent that things that are going on with the body and the mind impede us from seeing that in the moment, living in that in the moment, because it's fully present here and now, right here and now, fully present in you, everyone. Now, the only thing occluding that is your identification with your mind and your body. So when we start out in a dualistic state, we have to have practices that are they start out seeming dualistic. And Hatha Yoga is a practice like that. Depending on how you're doing mantra, it can be like that. But taking mantra as an example, because it's one of the fundamental practices for working with Kundalini is empowered mantra from a tradition of Kundalini Shakti. So that's what I pass out in, the programs, the audios, the writings. It's free. It's given. It's available. But mantra is a throb of the infinite. All mantras are created by Kundalini. All mantras. The entire Sanskrit alphabet is her creation. And that throb, that vibration that takes the form of mantra, well, mantras were originally heard in meditation. They're not mind born. They're born of the infinite so they can take you to the infinite. Your thoughts are mind born, so they keep you in your mind. They keep you in your body. They keep you in this ordinary contracted reality. No matter what the thought is. At best, a thought can point beyond, right? So for instance, a mantra, say you're using the Maha Mantra, the great mantra, Om Namah Shivaya. This is what Muktananda Baba gave to everybody. It's what his guru, Bhagavan Nityananda, gave. Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya. Well, it starts out when you're first repeating that, it seems like, well, there's me repeating it. I guess it refers to somebody called Shiva. I don't know who that is. I mean, it's depending on what a person's understanding is. And, you know, there's some consciousness I'm supposed to get to. These are all separate. They're all, to the ordinary mind, these are all separate. And we start out that way. And then we start the year, well, okay, Om Namah Shivaya means, it has a meaning. It means I bow to the auspicious one. Shiva just means the auspicious one. That's the infinite. That's the consciousness that is and has become, creates, sustains everything. So Om Namah Shivaya. Okay, so now it's bringing the mind into relationship to that. Om, I bow to Namah. I bow to that. Let me bow to my own self. Shiva is your own self. The auspicious one is your own self. That consciousness is the essence of who you are. So we're trying to get the mind to stop identifying with all these little tiny thoughts, feelings, everything, becoming each one of them, and return home. Come back. You are the infinite. You are the boundless. Yes, you've taken this dance of forms, and simultaneously, you can know yourself to be the ecstatic, rapturous, pure consciousness that was never diminished in any way. Right? So we're starting out. That's a what's called a beta upaya. Upaya means. So there's beta upaya for dualistic. There's Shaktupaya when we're sort of an in-between dualism and non-dualism. And then there's Shambhavupaya, that when we're right on that cusp and we just disappear. The efforting that's done is very different in each one. The efforting at the dualistic levels, we're really trying to dial into that. All the yamas and the niyamas are beta upaya practices. Asana, pranayama, pratyahara, dharana, dhyan, all beta upaya practices. They all seek to take you from where you started in a state of differentiation and disunity, and start moving you in the right direction. Right? When you start to draw closer, now you're starting to hold an awareness that there's sometimes it's like, oh, I am that. I am that. Oh, but it's more conceptual than fully real, but I'm drawing close. And so that's Shaktupaya. That's where we start to really cultivate the awareness of I am that. Because underlying Om Namah Shivaya is the awareness of I am Shiva. That's what it means of I am that. That's the Hamsa mantra. So it's always done with the awareness of I am that. Even when we're doing it as a beta upaya practice, if you're repeating Om Namah Shivaya as a meditative practice, you're doing it, practicing I am that. I am Om Namah Shivaya. I am Shiva. I am the mantra. I'm the one repeating the mantra. I'm the goal of the mantra. I'm the throb of the infinite. I am that. And it has a very effortful component to it. But it's right effort because it's heading in the right direction. Right? And after a while, that starts to change the samskars, because most of the day, what are you practicing? Oh, I'm happy, I'm sad, I like this, I don't like that, I remember this. You're practicing the awareness of I am a little tiny thing. And even when I'm happy, I'm just a little happy thing. You know, it's still not your Shiva nature. Shiva's rapturous I consciousness. It's boundless. When Buddha talked about it, he talked about the four immeasurables. The boundless, rapturous joy is one of them. The unshakable equanimity is one of them. Right? The boundless compassion and love is one of them. The infinite wisdom Those are the four immeasurables. They're not four separate things. The mind is an instrument for differentiation. So it sees four where there's only one. That one has these qualities. Full with that. That's what you come to know. Right? So practice has a component for every moment of the day, because a yogi knows you're either practicing coming to rest and moving towards the fullness of the truth of who you are, or you're unconsciously practicing limited identification, ignorance, bondage, digging the hole deeper. There's only two choices there.
I have a question, because you used the word differentiation, and I know, so that's a term that actually came up for me this week in the work I was doing with my therapist, and it seems to be that I want to see if you agree with this or what your take is on this, that for certain ones of us who's haven't perhaps developed a really solid container and nervous system, that the process, if it's really dramatic, can like fragment the consciousness, and it sometimes feels like my entire journey with this has become about learning how to differentiate myself, learning in my nervous system how to differentiate, how to actually master that developmental stage of differentiation. And then once I started to do that from a solid sense of self, then I felt like I was able to safely go beyond that into the infinite with no self. Is there like would you say there's like a developmental sort of set of stages that relate to that?
Yeah, and
a psychologist as well as a yogi.
Right. Well, and the truth is, the yogic traditions, the Eastern traditions in general, the mystical traditions in general, assumed a healthy ego. That was just the assumption.
Okay. Yeah. Right.
So it was not a remedial framework.
Right.
Right. It was saying, okay, if you're ready to do this, you've got it together on it. If you read, for instance, Shankaracharya's Shankaracharya is a great Siddha master, who wrote the Viveka Chudamani, the crest jewel of discrimination. In that, he also talks about the qualifications of a seeker. You read the qualifications of a seeker in classic yogic and Vedantic terms, and you'd think this is already a realized being, because that it was assumed that to be serious about doing spiritual work, you already had mastered a lot of different things. And so what's happened, both in transpersonal psychology and in the integration of Eastern traditions into Western psychology, is seeing that, okay, some of these practices, have therapeutic benefits for people, because it'll help downregulate the autonomic nervous system and help a person be able to differentiate themselves from unhealthy states of enmeshment. That's not union. That's undifferentiated. And that can be in relationship to anything, family situations, lovers, all kinds of things, that kind of unhealthy merging and failure to differentiate and sustain boundaries is going on. And then that's part of a person's sadhana. That's happening because it can happen along with Shakti awakening. These are not mutually exclusive. It's just saying, okay, that's where we start. Let's do that work. And that's then that kind of work. And so the Eastern traditions assumed that there was a healthy limited eye awareness, from which you're trying to peel consciousness away to know the infinite eye awareness. But if that limited eye awareness has too many kinks in it, then she just goes, okay, we're going to work on that. That's fine. And that's going to take a different route than classic yoga. And that's why, therapeutic paradigms, medications, all kinds of things, neurofeedback, biofeedback, can all be helpful, because they're helping the instrument get into shape to be able to hold this larger consciousness and sort of the larger energy of that, and not feel like it's just going to disintegrate.
Yeah, thank you. the fear of disintegration was terrifying. People would talk about oneness, and I was like, stop. Like, thank you. That makes sense to me. I want to open it up to the rest of you here to ask what you would like to ask of Lawrence. And if you want to just say your name and where you're from, that would be awesome.
Did you have a question?
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought we were going around introducing ourselves.
Oh, perfect. Let's do that first.
I think the last comment that you made sort of sums up kind of what I was going to ask. So I'm trying to figure out on my last intense experience. It lasted a couple of months. It felt like a grand finale. I'm new to all of this. I'm in my third year. I'm only now starting to study. My mind wasn't able to read books for the first 28 months. So long story short, I'm now starting to have kidney adrenal pain. So I'm wondering, and I do have the book, The Biology of Kundalini, but it's very dense and I'm working on it. So I'm wondering if you might know what I might be able to do. I did stop the mantra. I was doing that twice a day, and all the intense practices, I backed off. It's been 2 months, I don't know, maybe 3, lost track of time. But yeah, I mean, this is the first time, and it is officially 3 years now. So I'm starting to have kidney adrenal pain, and I've talked to doctors. I'm fine. I'm doing supplementation and all of that. I just thought, maybe there's something more that I'm not aware of that I can do to help myself.
Yeah, that's the kind of thing, to find who you can consult with in terms of naturopaths or homeopaths, your physicians. If you went through the more traditional medical route and didn't find any help there, whether it's often good Ayurvedic doctors are very helpful around these kinds of the side effects that's going on physically, even emotionally with the energy moving. So I would pursue those kinds of professionals.
Okay. Yeah. And is it because it's like it's my subtle body? Is it because my subtle body is not pure enough to go through everything that it just went through the past 2 months? Or
no, well, that's a good question, and it's a little different. I mean, it's to understand Kriyas, and the movement, the spontaneous movement of Shakti is known as Kriyas. So Kriyas can happen on all the levels of existence that we experience. So physical, emotional, mental, subtle body stuff, physical body things, and the mind is often trying to search with saying, well, why or how? And you may never know that. It's karma. I mean, the yoga traditions just go, to the extent that you're thinking about that, now you're not thinking about yourself as God. So where do you want your attention to rest? Because it's all about, in the end, attention. Even when we have big symptoms going on, the difficulty in them is they grab our attention. So part of the fundamental practices in all the yogic traditions is how do we develop the kind of detached, dispassionate witness consciousness that watches without getting involved, without getting the mind propensity for trying to connect dots that aren't there, to just turn it over to, okay, what can I do on a practical level to help relieve this? So let me find out, there's a naturopath or homeopath or Ayurvedic doctor, or the things I can do, or dietary things I should change. But it's all the clarification, purification process that the subtle body and physical body are going through. And that is literally in the yogic tradition seen as grace unfolding. These things are lodged in the system. They got to come out at some point, many of which are being gotten rid of, like I was talking about before, the mountains of karmas that we don't even have to go through.
Right.
But some have components of experience that we go through the suffering, the pain that was part of how it got lodged in the physical body or subtle body. And mostly what we want to do is bathe it in Shakti, bathe it in mantra, bathe it in whatever, other kinds of remedies a doctor might give it to, but let it go. It's not who you are.
Okay.
And you only want to give it enough attention to help take care of it, but it's not who you are. The body is not who you are. You have a body, you're not your body. You have a mind, you're not your mind. So who are you?
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Sure. No, it's a great question. So, and that gets back to what I was talking about, the different upayas. When we start out feeling separate, we are separate. As you think, so you become. So that thought and that understanding that there's God and there's me. And that's where all beings start. I mean, that's it. And so you start in relationship. The relationship starts out as, if you look at the practices, for instance, the yamas and the niyamas in the Yoga Sutras or in Ashtanga, classic Ashtanga yoga, they're all about coming into relationship of harmony, of obedience, of connecting to the highest and how it would express itself through us by able to live dharmically, live non-violently towards ourselves and others. That's a reflection of coming into relationship to your highest self. And you don't have to worry about when it's going to move to unity kind. You can know that that's the foundation of what that understanding is. But the mind can't leap there. So your practices start out, and I've worked with many people in 12-step programs, and that understanding of how do we come into relationship, meaning especially to know that the higher power is within us. So how do I refine my mind to become more subtle so I can hear that? Well, those are the namas and the namas and niyamas are all about that. Just quieting meditation, just being able to stay gently with the breath and let go of every time the mind jumps to react on this thing, jumps to react on this thing. No, I'm just letting it go and coming back to a slower and deeper breath. When we slow and deepen the breath, we're changing our whole neurophysiology. We're now calming the system. And now we're pairing this calmed, more relaxed autonomic nervous system with thoughts that in the past used to be provocative, but now they've been deconditioned and they're there, but I don't react to them. And then after a while, without reaction, without attention, they start to diminish and go away. We know this neurophysiologically. That's not just a metaphysical kind of concept. Attention is what sustains circuitry in the brain. So saying in neurophysiology, things that fire together, wire together. Firing together means they're co-occurring with our attention or our reactions. So we start to unplug that and say, no, now whatever comes up, I'm just going to pair it with just this detached, gracious awareness. I'm just going to watch it go by. I'm just going to keep inviting my breath to stay smooth and steady. I might just do, there's a fundamental mantra that is simply aham, right? That the breath comes in with ah and goes out with hum. It means simply I am. I am. It's taking refuge in I am. Because so much of what disturbs the mind is I am this, I am that, I am the past, I am the future, I am lost, I am this, whatever it is. If you keep letting go of all the stuff that comes after I am and can just start the rest in just the awareness of being, just simply being present. I am. I am. I can rest in just the awareness of being. I am. And that helps to really calm the whole nervous system. And it helps to retrain the mind to let go of things.
Thank you. Thank you
Yeah.
for answering the question.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, good questions. Yeah. So part of what happens for anybody, even if they're not going through, the extra energy that the Shakti gives to it, they sit down and meditate, and there's all these voices going on, and you become more and more aware of all the different directions that the mind creates, and the mind. Now we start to look at some of the fundamental dynamics about mind, because the yoga practices in general, meditative practices in general, Kundalini definitely, are about being able to step back and witness the mind, and not be driven by the mind, no matter what its state, because it's going to produce all kinds of things. And one thing that we know from the mind, it craves attention. It grabs your attention. You can be sitting and trying to get quiet and still, and it'll make your leg hurt, your foot twitch, your face itch. It'll do this or that. It'll produce wonderful thoughts, horrible thoughts. It exists as an object of attention. So no attention, it starts to not exist. It's very afraid of that. It needs to be reassured that it's not going to lose its existence, and that it's okay to become quiet and experience what else is present, the graceful presence of pure awareness, the higher awareness of higher self that can inform the mind in a wholly different way. Because the other thing is the mind, it's had lifetimes upon lifetimes upon lifetimes of having to rely on its ability to generate solutions to problems. Pain is a problem. How do I get it to go away? The mind chomps away on that and comes up with all kinds of, let me try this, I better do that, I'm afraid of this, it's another thing. It's just on and on and on and on. And that's why on itself, by itself, it's never going to get free. It's like, can you jump over your own shadow? No. It's really why it was seen as the awakening of Kundalini is absolutely essential for getting free of the mind. Because who created the mind? Kundalini. It's her creation. She's the only lord of the mind. So letting go of all those things. That doesn't mean we have to also know, well, how do I find help? There could be problems. I can't just let them go. If I have a health issue, I just don't just let it go. I practice letting go to differentiate from it, but I still then seek practical help for that. I've seen too many people who spiritualized bodily issues and, this was Kundalini and it turned out to be an endocrinological problem. It came out to be something else. And there were real solutions and they helped relieve all the suffering. So we want to take practical steps to understand what could be done. And that's why even sometimes our mind is carrying conditioned patterns that, psychology is going to be good at helping out with, or biofeedback or neurofeedback, to be able to calm certain aspects of the mind and brain. And it's all good to make use of those things. So we want to have both this practical understanding as well as understanding that the fundamental dynamic of Shakti, of awakened Kundalini, is to differentiate our consciousness from content of mind and body. The content of mind and body have so dominated awareness for so long and have been the very sense of self is content, right? Ask somebody who they are, they tell you about the content of their mind. Yeah, I'm happy, I'm sad, I'm this or that. It's the role they play, the gender of their body. It's all these limited identifications, not the truth of who they are. Yeah. And so yoga is fundamental about being focused on, no, this is about knowing the truth of who you are, even while we help the body become healthier and stronger, and deal with the karmas that it came into this life with. That we help the mind get healthier and stronger, and deal with the karmas it came in to deal with, right? Because this life and the karmas that we came in with are the temenos. They're the sacred container for our sadhana. When we eliminate a karma that is emblematic of lifetimes of karma, we're getting free of the lifetimes of karma, even if we're just taking on this karma with this person. So we want to be skillful at that. We want to get free of that. That's another good question. So in the yogic tradition, there's Shuddha and Ashuddha Vidya. There's pure and impure thoughts. Impure thoughts, that's not a Victorian notion. Impure thoughts has to do with, is it reflective of the truth of who you are? So, or not. So a pure thought is, I am the infinite. Still a thought, but it's pointing in the right direction. Impure thought, I'm Lawrence. Doesn't reflect the truth. So what we entertain on the level of wanting to know the absolute is to know that highest. What are we identified with? What we want to also be able to be skillful at is, what do we do in the world? Well, that requires a healthy, limited eye awareness. So we're working on both levels simultaneously. But when we start to know the infinitude of who we are, we take the pains and suffering of the little thing a little less seriously. And so for instance, a pure thought is Om Namah Shivaya. Mantra is a pure thought. It comes from beyond the mind and goes beyond the mind. Starts out as that Beta Upaya practice of repeating it very consciously, silently or out loud, chanting. Then it becomes more subtle, becomes more of a subtle practice. It starts to go on its own. It starts to go on with the awareness of I am that. Now it's not just the sound form of a Sanskrit collection of words of Om Namah Shivaya. It's infused with that awareness of I am that, because that's the root of mantra. The root of mantra is the awareness, I am infinite. And so the awareness starts to be more and more clearly present, because the mantra helps to refine and make the mind more subtle, so we can get past the forest of thoughts and feelings and emotions and samskaras and start to dial into what was already fully there. So entertaining those notions of what's the truth of who you are. That's why Swadhyaya is a practice of called self-study. Well, chants, long chants are self-study, but reading texts, reading the Shiva Sutras, that's self-study. Reading, great poet saints, Kabir, Rumi, self-study, because in their words are reflected the truth of who you are and can help bring you back. So it becomes more and more clear for a yogi that what we hold in our mind is really important. So much junk has been poured into our mind. So much junk comes in our mind all day long through various sources. A yogi does not allow that. That's just mind pollution. They're all impure thoughts. They're going to take you away.
Thank you, Lawrence.
Yeah.
I can just say a quick comment. That's all I have. Yeah. Just the difficulty sometimes to remain in that awareness throughout the day, despite everything trying to pull you in, right? Mm-hmm. It can be challenging. So I like what you said about kind of using mantra to return to that more and more establish yourself in that more fully, so that it kind of doesn't pull you in constantly. That's something that can be challenging sometimes in the practical, like everyday aspects of life where things seem to demand identification, mm-hmm. like constantly. Right. So yeah, just constantly coming back to that it's a very long and in my experience practice to come out of that more fully and be established in that. And I think there's moments where I keep going back into that and then back out of that and so forth. So it just seems like a very long process to make it happen.
It is. Yeah. It's lifetimes.
Yeah.
And with the grace of Kundalini, it's very few lifetimes. But that practice of repeatedly, you could summarize sort of many things about sadhana is letting go, coming back, letting go, coming back, letting go. That's all you're doing. You're letting go and coming back, letting go of the false, coming back to the truths of who you are, letting go of the false notion of who you are, coming back. That's why whenever we're in pain, as soon as you start to feel emotional pain, anything, ask yourself, who have I become now? What am I identified with in this moment? That's the source of the pain.
Yeah, maybe one more thing on topic with that is that sometimes when Kundalini seems to be clearing house and that emotional pain comes up, it feels like although I'm not identifying with it, there's an aspect of it that wants to be seen and like met and felt, and then it kind of moves through me and gets released. So there's some confusion in my mind about I'm not identifying this, but I'm still kind of letting this move through me and feel it and kind of let this empty out. So just differentiating that.
Right. It's distinguishing between consciousness that illumines the experience, because the consciousness is who you are. The experience of the pain, whatever it is, physical pain, emotional pain, is content. And you don't have to resist it. You don't have to fight with it. You just watch it go by. And so being present with it is the way to be skillfully meeting it, because you've differentiated. You're not the pain. The pain is there. And if anything, you practice compassion for the body or the mind going through that as it releases. So it becomes a practice of compassion to be present with it in that way. Not anger, frustration, irritability, fear, compassion. Always practice the compassionate awareness that just watches with loving kindness.
Yeah, perfect.
Thank you, Lawrence. Thank you so much for being with us and sharing, taking questions from us in this really beautiful, intimate setting. I want to be respectful of your time and let you go, but I wondered if you guys wanted to stay on for a little impromptu, quick integration circle. The rest of you? Okay. Oh, so we'll let you. You're welcome to stay, but yes, thank you so much, and I'll be in touch with you soon. And as always, thank you for your gift of your wisdom and sharing.
And and we have Anam Kara is a nonprofit organization. I don't know if everybody's aware of it, but we have over 100 videos up freely available on the Anam Kara YouTube channel with chants, meditation, some talks aimed at Kundalini, sadhana in general, different practices, all an open free resource for people. So
that's awesome. Okay, I'll post that so we can.
Thank you, Lauren.
All right.
Thank you so much.
All right. Good seeing you. Nice to meet you all.
Be well. We'll see you soon.
Bye-bye.